The gunshot cracked through the canyon just as Delilah Morrison's mare spooked, sending rocks cascading down the narrow mountain pass in a roar that swallowed every other sound in the New Mexico twilight. Delilah had been riding alone from Santa Fe back to Oro Grande, carrying medicine for Doc Henderson's clinic where she worked as his assistant, when the shot rang out from somewhere in the ridges above. She never saw the shooter, never knew if they were aiming at her or hunting deer, but it did not matter because her horse reared and the world became a chaos of falling stone. She threw herself from the saddle just as the first boulder crashed down, rolling toward the rock face at the side of the trail, pressing herself into a small hollow as the mountain seemed to come apart above her. The rockslide lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. Dust choked her lungs and the thunder of stone on stone deafened her. When the rumbling finally stopped, Delilah found herself in absolute darkness, wedged into a space barely large enough for her body, with tons of rock sealing her inside. She could not move her legs. Sharp pain lanced through her left ankle, and her right arm was pinned awkwardly beneath her. The air was thick and hot and tasted of minerals. She tried not to panic, tried to breathe slowly through the cloth of her sleeve, filtering the dust. Doc Henderson would notice when she did not return by nightfall. Someone would come looking. They had to. But as the hours crawled past in that suffocating blackness, doubt crept in like the cold that came once the sun set fully. Her water canteen was somewhere outside this tomb of stone. She was so thirsty already, and no one knew exactly which route she had taken through the mountains. She had chosen the shorter pass, the dangerous one, because she wanted to get home before dark. Foolish, so foolish. Delilah was 22 years old, and she had survived cholera as a child, survived her parents' deaths 3 years ago, survived the hard scrabble life of a woman alone in New Mexico territory in 1882. She was not ready to die in the dark. Vincent Nash was 3 miles away when he heard the distant rumble of the rockslide, and he knew in his gut that something was wrong. He had been tracking a man named Cutter for 2 days, following him through these mountains, but the sound came from the eastern pass, and Cutter's trail led west. Vincent reined in his buckskin gelding and sat very still, listening. Nothing but wind now. But rockslides were not uncommon in these mountains, and travelers used that pass regularly. Someone might be hurt, might be dying. Vincent was a cowboy by trade, working cattle drives and ranch work across New Mexico and Colorado, but he had grown up in these mountains. His father had been a prospector, his mother a washerwoman in Silver City, and Vincent knew stone the way some men knew horses or cards. He had dug his father out of a collapsed mine shaft when he was 16. Had learned that sometimes you had to move mountains with your bare hands if you loved someone enough. He did not know anyone was trapped in that rockslide, did not know who they were or if they were alive. But he turned his horse east anyway, because that was the kind of man Vincent Nash was at 25 years old. Tall and lean and weathered, with dark hair that fell past his collar and eyes the color of winter sky, he looked like trouble to most people. But he had never left someone to die when he could help. His conscience would not allow it. The sun was setting when he reached the pass and saw the devastation. Hundreds of tons of rock had come down, completely blocking the narrow trail. There was no way through, no way over. And as he dismounted and approached, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A horse's saddle, crushed beneath a boulder. Empty. "Hello," Vincent called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Anyone there? Can you hear me?" Silence. Just the wind and the settling of stone. He called again, louder. Then he pressed his ear to the rocks and listened. Nothing at first. Then, so faint he almost missed it, a sound. A voice. A woman's voice calling back. Delilah heard the shout as if from another world. At first she thought she was hallucinating, that the darkness and fear had fractured her mind. But then it came again, a man's voice, rough and urgent, asking if anyone could hear. "Here," she screamed, her throat raw. "I am here, I am trapped." She could not hear his response through all the stone, but she heard something. Movement. The scrape of rock on rock. Someone was out there. Someone was looking for her. Fresh tears streamed down her face, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She was not alone anymore. Vincent worked like a man possessed as full darkness fell. He could not move the largest boulders, not without equipment, but he could shift the smaller rocks, could dig and pry and leverage. He worked by moonlight and by touch, his hands soon bloody, his shoulders screaming with effort. He called out every few minutes, and the woman called back, her voice guiding him toward where she was buried. "What is your name?" he shouted during one brief rest, gasping for breath. A pause. Then, Delilah Morrison. "I am Vincent Nash. I am going to get you out, Delilah, you hear me?" "I am not leaving, please hurry." Her voice was weaker now, frightened. "I cannot breathe well." Terror gave him new strength. He attacked the rocks with renewed fury, hauling away stone after stone, digging deeper into the collapsed pass. His back protested, and his hands were ribbons of torn flesh, but he did not stop. Could not stop. Somewhere in that darkness was a woman who was running out of air, and she was depending on him. He rigged his rope to his horse, and used the animal's strength to shift a particularly large boulder, then crawled into the gap it left and kept digging. He was maybe 10 feet into the rockslide now, working in a space so tight he could barely turn around. Dust filled his lungs with every breath. "Delilah, talk to me. You still with me?" "Yes," but her voice sounded distant, thready. "I am so tired, Vincent." "I know, darling, I know, but you have got to stay awake for me. Tell me about yourself. Where are you from?" He kept working as she talked, her voice drifting to him through the rocks. She told him she was from Ohio originally, had come west with her parents when she was 15. They had died of fever and left her alone, but Doc Henderson had taken her on as an assistant. She had learned to set bones and stitch wounds, to mix medicines and deliver babies. She loved the work, loved helping people. Vincent told her about himself as he dug, needing to keep her talking, needing to hear her voice so he knew she was still alive. He told her about growing up in mining camps, about learning to read from a schoolteacher who came through Silver City one winter, about working cattle drives from Montana to Texas, about the good horses he had known and the bad men he had met. He did not tell her about the loneliness, about how he was always moving because stopping meant facing the emptiness of his life. Some things you did not say to a stranger, but she did not feel like a stranger. Not anymore. 3 hours into the digging, his hands struck something different. Not rock, cloth. He scrabbled frantically and found her boot, her ankle, her leg. "Delilah, I have got you, I found you." A sob echoed through the rocks. "Thank God. Oh, thank God." He worked more carefully now, terrified of causing another collapse, of crushing her while trying to save her. He cleared the rocks from around her legs, then her torso, then finally, he could see her face in the moonlight filtering through the tunnel he had created. She was covered in dust, her dark hair matted with it, her dress torn and bloody. But her eyes were open and fixed on him with an expression of such desperate hope and gratitude that something shifted in his chest. "Hello there," he said softly, trying to smile despite his exhaustion. "Let us get you out of here." "I thought I was going to die," she whispered. "Not tonight. Not while I am here." He had to widen the tunnel to pull her free, which took another hour of brutal labor. By the time he finally dragged her out into the open air, both of them were shaking with exhaustion. He carried her away from the rockslide and laid her gently on a flat piece of ground, then ran to his horse for his canteen and bedroll. She drank deeply, coughing, then looked up at him in the moonlight. Really looked at him for the first time. Saw the blood on his hands and the dirt on his face and the utter weariness in his eyes. "You dug through all that stone for me," she said wonderingly. "You do not even know me." "I know you now," Vincent said, and something in his voice made her heart skip. He examined her injuries by the light of a hastily built fire. Her ankle was badly sprained, maybe broken, and she had cuts and bruises everywhere, but nothing that would not heal. She was lucky, impossibly lucky. "We cannot travel in the dark through these mountains," he told her, wrapping her ankle with strips torn from his spare shirt. "And you are in no shape to ride. We will wait until dawn." Delilah nodded, too tired to argue. He gave her more water and a piece of jerky from his saddlebag, then settled beside her with his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness for any sign of danger. "That gunshot that started the rockslide," he said quietly. "You see who fired it? No, it could have been a hunter. Could have been anything." But they both knew these mountains had their share of outlaws and dangerous men. Vincent would keep watch until sunrise. Delilah dozed fitfully, waking often from nightmares of suffocating darkness. Each time she woke, Vincent was there, solid and real, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. This man had literally moved mountains to save her, had destroyed his hands digging through stone for a stranger. What kind of man did that? When dawn finally broke, painting the canyon walls gold and crimson, she watched him pack up their meager camp with economical movements, and she noticed things she had missed in the chaos of the night. The way his hands, even torn and bloody, were gentle when he touched her. The quiet competence in everything he did. The strength in his shoulders and the kindness in his eyes. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, but it was more than that. There was something about Vincent Nash that called to her, that made her want to know everything about him. "Can you ride if I hold you?" he asked, helping her stand. She tested her weight on her injured ankle and gasped. "I think I have to," she said. He lifted her onto his horse as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her, one arm wrapped firmly around her waist. She leaned back against his chest and felt his heart beating steady and strong, and something warm unfurled in her belly. The ride to Oro Grande took most of the day. The town was small but growing, built around silver mining and cattle ranching, with a main street of false-fronted buildings and a church at one end. Doc Henderson's office was above the general store, and when Vincent carried Delilah up the stairs, the old doctor took one look at them and started barking orders. "Get her on the table." "What happened?" "Delilah, girl, I have been worried sick." Vincent explained about the rockslide while Doc Henderson examined Delilah's injuries. The ankle was sprained, not broken, which was good news. He cleaned her cuts and gave her laudanum for the pain, then turned his attention to Vincent's hands. "You did this digging her out?" The doctor asked, examining the torn flesh with a practiced eye. "Yes, sir. You saved her life, young man. That ankle would have been the least of her worries if she had spent another day trapped in there." He began cleaning and bandaging Vincent's hands with firm efficiency. "You got a place to stay in town?" Vincent shook his head. "I was just passing through." "Not anymore, you are not. You are not going anywhere until those hands heal, and that is doctor's orders." Doc Henderson pointed to a cot in the corner of his office. "You can stay here. I will pay you if you help around the place while you are recovering. Lord knows I could use another pair of hands, even injured ones." Vincent glanced at Delilah, who was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "I appreciate that, Doc. Thank you." Over the next week, Vincent stayed in Oro Grande and helped around the doctor's office however he could. Mostly he did heavy lifting, moving supplies and equipment, chopping wood, fetching water. His hands healed slowly, but they healed. And every day he saw Delilah. She was remarkable. Even hobbling on her injured ankle, she worked tirelessly, helping Doc Henderson with patients, mixing medicines, offering comfort to the sick and injured. She had a gentle way about her, but there was steel underneath. She did not flinch from blood or pain or death. She just did what needed doing. And she talked to Vincent. During quiet moments, during meals, during the long evenings when the work was done, they talked. She asked him about his life on the trail, about the places he had seen, the adventures he had had. He asked her about medicine, about life in Oro Grande, about her dreams for the future. "I want to be a real doctor someday," she told him one evening as they sat on the steps outside the office, watching the sun set over the mountains. "A woman doctor. I know it is almost impossible, but there are a few female physicians now back east. Maybe someday I could go to medical school." "You would be a fine doctor," Vincent said. "You have got the mind for it and the heart." She smiled at him, and the warmth in her eyes made his breath catch. "What about you? What do you want, Vincent? You cannot just drift forever." He was quiet for a long moment. "I guess I never let myself want anything permanent," he admitted. "Seemed safer that way, but lately I have been thinking maybe it is time to stop running." "From what?" "From being alone, I suppose." Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them, something electric and terrifying and wonderful. Delilah felt her heart start to race. She had known this man for barely a week, but she felt like she had known him forever. Like he was the other half of something she had been missing all her life. Vincent reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. "Delilah," he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes. I know this is fast. I know we just met. But I cannot stop thinking about you. Cannot imagine riding away from here and never seeing you again." Her breath hitched. "Then do not ride away." He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, but she did not want him to stop. She wanted this more than she had ever wanted anything. When his lips finally met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect, and she felt like she was falling and flying all at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I am not a rich man," he said quietly. "I've got my horse and my gear and about $60 to my name. But I am a hard worker and I am honest, and I swear to God, Delilah, if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Vincent Nash, are you asking me to marry you?" "I guess I am. I know it is crazy, I know it is too soon. But when I was digging through that stone, all I could think was that I had to reach you, had to save you, because something in me already knew that you were important, that you were meant to be in my life." He cupped her face in his bandaged hands. "I love you, Delilah. I know it is too fast to feel this way, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," she whispered, and knew it was true. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight, hardly able to believe this was real. 1 week ago she had been alone, trapped in the dark, certain she was going to die. Now she was in the arms of a man who had moved mountains for her, who loved her, who wanted to build a life with her. They were married 2 weeks later in the little church at the end of Main Street, with Doc Henderson standing up as witness and half the town in attendance. Delilah wore a simple dress of blue calico that the seamstress, Mrs. Chen, had altered for her, and Vincent wore his best shirt and pants, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his hands finally healed enough to hold hers without bandages. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Vincent gathered Delilah into his arms and kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and everyone cheered. They rented a small house on the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Vincent got work at the Hammond Ranch, riding herd and breaking horses, while Delilah continued helping Doc Henderson. At night, they came home to each other, and those evenings were magic. They cooked simple meals together and talked about everything and nothing, and when they finally went to bed, Vincent made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered one night, lying in his arms in the darkness. "Never knew I could feel so complete." "Me neither," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are everything, Delilah, everything I never knew I needed." The first year of their marriage was not easy. Money was tight and the work was hard, and there were times when they went to bed hungry because the ranch had not paid yet or a patient had no money to pay Doc Henderson. But they had each other, and that made everything bearable. Vincent proved to be as good as his word. He worked harder than any man at Hammond Ranch, never complained, never shirked. He saved every penny he could, dreaming of the day when he might buy them a real home, maybe a little piece of land where they could raise horses. Delilah threw herself into learning everything Doc Henderson could teach her, reading his medical books late into the night, practicing techniques on anyone who would let her. She dreamed of her medical school, yes, but she also dreamed of opening a real clinic in Oro Grande, a place where everyone could get care regardless of their ability to pay. They built a life together, slowly and carefully, brick by brick. They made friends in town. Delilah helped deliver the blacksmith's baby and stitched up the saloon keeper's son when he got in a knife fight. Vincent earned a reputation as the best horse breaker in the territory, gentle but firm, able to settle even the wildest Mustang, and they loved each other. Deeply, fiercely, with everything they had. One spring evening, almost 2 years after the Rockslide, Delilah met Vincent at the door with tears in her eyes and her hands trembling. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, gathering her close. "Are you hurt? Did something happen?" "No," she said, laughing through her tears. "Nothing is wrong. Vincent, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a whoop of pure joy and picked her up and spun her around, careful even in his excitement not to jostle her too much. "A baby," he shouted. "We are having a baby." Their son was born in late autumn, right as the leaves turned gold on the cottonwoods. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Vincent feared he would lose them both, but Delilah was strong and Doc Henderson knew his business. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, Vincent wept with relief. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father, and he was perfect. Dark hair like Vincent's, dark eyes like Delilah's, and lungs that could wake the dead when he was hungry. Vincent proved to be a devoted father. He would walk the floor with Thomas for hours when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. He built a cradle with his own hands and carved little wooden horses for his son to play with. And every night, without fail, he kissed both his wife and his son and thanked God for the rockslide that had brought them together. "I know that is a terrible thing to be grateful for," he told Delilah one night as they watched Thomas sleep. "You could have died." "But I did not," she said, leaning into him. "You saved me, and now look at what we have." Life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and fearless, always getting into things he should not touch. Delilah continued working with Doc Henderson, although she cut back her hours to spend more time with Thomas. Vincent was promoted to foreman at Hammond Ranch, which came with better pay and a small house on the ranch property. They moved out of their tiny rental and into something bigger, with a real yard where Thomas could play. When Thomas was 3, Doc Henderson took Delilah aside one day and told her he was getting old, that his eyes were not what they used to be and his hands sometimes shook. "I want you to take over the practice," he said. "I know you are not a licensed physician, but you are the best medical practitioner in 100 miles, licensed or not. This town needs you, Delilah, and I trust you completely." She accepted with tears of gratitude, and when Doc Henderson retired 6 months later, she became the de facto doctor of Oro Grande. Some folks grumbled about a woman in the position, but most people did not care as long as she could heal them, and she could. She was brilliant and dedicated and compassionate, and soon even the grumblers came around. Vincent's horse breeding venture finally took off when he managed to gentle a notorious Mustang that no one else could handle. The rancher who had been trying to break the horse for 2 years offered Vincent a partnership, breeding and training horses for sale throughout the territory. It was the opportunity Vincent had been waiting for, and with Delilah's blessing, he accepted. They were prosperous now, comfortable in a way neither of them had ever expected to be. But the money was not what mattered. What mattered was coming home every night to each other, to Thomas, to the life they had built together. When Thomas was 5, Delilah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Vincent's blue eyes and Delilah's stubborn chin, and she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "I dug through a mountain for your mother," Vincent told Rose one night, holding her while she slept. "And I would do it again 1,000 times to have this life with all of you." Delilah, watching from the doorway, felt her heart swell almost painfully with love. This man, this good and decent man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living, was everything she had ever hoped for and more. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work and love. Thomas grew tall and serious, interested in his father's horses and his mother's medicine both. Rose grew wild and free, climbing trees and racing her pony and declaring she was going to be a cowgirl when she grew up. Vincent's horse breeding business expanded until he had a small ranch of his own, separate from Hammond's place, with a dozen good breeding mares, and a reputation for producing the finest horses in New Mexico territory. Delilah's clinic became a fixture in Oro Grande, and she trained 2 younger women as assistants, passing on everything Doc Henderson had taught her. She still dreamed sometimes of going east for proper medical school, but the dream had changed. She realized she did not need a diploma to do the work she loved, to help the people who needed her. She was a doctor in every way that mattered. One evening, nearly 10 years after the Rockslide, Vincent came home to find Delilah sitting on their porch, watching the sunset over the mountains. He settled beside her and took her hand, noting the silver threads that had started to appear in her dark hair, the laugh lines around her eyes. She was even more beautiful to him now than she had been that night when he first pulled her from the rocks. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About that night," she said softly. "About how I thought I was going to die alone in the dark, how I had made peace with it or tried to. And then I heard your voice calling out, asking if anyone was there, and it was like the whole world shifted. I almost did not go," Vincent admitted. "I was tracking a horse thief. I had a job to do, and I stood there for a full minute trying to decide if I should check on the Rockslide or keep after my man." She turned to look at him, surprised. "You never told me that." "Because I am ashamed I even hesitated, but I did. And then I thought about how I would feel if I rode away and someone died because I did not stop to help, and I knew I could never live with that." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Best decision I ever made, turning my horse east that day." "I love you," Delilah said. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes, because I know how easily I could have lost this, could have died before I ever met you, before I ever had Thomas or Rose or this beautiful life we have built. But you did not die, Vincent said firmly. You lived. We both lived. And we found each other in the middle of all that stone and darkness, and we made something good, something lasting. Do you ever regret giving up the cowboy life? The wandering, he shook his head. Not even for a second. That was not living, Delilah. That was just passing time until I found something worth staying for. You are worth staying for. Our children are worth staying for. This life we have is worth everything. They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas and Rose arguing about something, then laughing, and the sound made them both smile. We should go in, Delilah said after a while. Get the children ready for bed. In a minute, Vincent said. I just want to hold you for a minute longer. So they stayed, wrapped in each other's arms under the New Mexico stars, grateful for rockslides and second chances and the love that had grown between them, strong enough to move mountains. 5 more years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, of quiet moments and everyday miracles. Thomas, at 15, was already showing promise as both a horseman and a healer, spending mornings with Vincent learning to train horses and afternoons with Delilah learning anatomy and medicine. Rose, at 10, was indeed every bit the cowgirl she had promised to be, riding like she was born in the saddle, fearless and free. The ranch had expanded again. Vincent now employed 3 men to help with the horses, and his stock was sold as far away as Texas and Colorado. Delilah's clinic had grown too. A proper building now instead of just rooms above the general store, with a surgery, a recovery room, and an office where she kept meticulous records of every patient she treated. They were no longer the struggling young couple who had started with nothing but love and determination. They were respected members of the community, prosperous and established. But they never forgot where they had come from, never forgot the night that had changed everything. Every year on the anniversary of the Rockslide, Vincent and Delilah rode out to the canyon pass where it had happened. The trail had been cleared long ago, made safe for travelers, but they still went, still stood at the spot where he had dug through stone to reach her, still marveled at the miracle of it all. If someone had told me that night what the future held, Delilah said during one such visit, standing in the exact spot where she had been trapped, I would not have believed them, would have thought I was hallucinating from lack of air. I would have believed it, Vincent said, pulling her close, because the moment I heard your voice calling back to me through all that rock, I knew my life had just changed forever. Romantic, she teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. I am serious, I knew. Maybe not the details, not about Thomas or Rose or the ranch or any of it. But I knew you were going to be important to me. Knew I had to save you, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because losing you, even though I did not know you yet, would have broken something in me. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, studying the lines that time and sun had carved there, the silver in his hair that matched her own now, the steadiness in his eyes that had never wavered. We are getting old, she said wonderingly. We are getting lucky, he corrected. Every day with you is luck I do not deserve. He kissed her there in the canyon, with the wind singing through the rocks and the afternoon sun warming their shoulders, and it felt exactly like coming home. When Thomas turned 18, he announced that he wanted to go east to medical school, to become a licensed physician like his mother should have been. Delilah cried, partly from pride and partly from the ache of knowing her boy was growing up, leaving, becoming his own man. I will come back, Thomas promised. This is my home. These are my people. But I want to learn everything I can so I can come back and help you run the clinic properly, so we can make it even bigger and better. Your mother has been running that clinic just fine for 15 years, Vincent said, but his voice was thick with emotion too. I know. But imagine what she could do with a partner, with someone who has all the newest training, all the latest techniques. Thomas looked at his mother seriously. You taught me that healing people matters more than anything. Let me learn how to do it better, then come home and work beside you. So they sent their son east to medical school in Philadelphia, and the house felt emptier without him. But Rose was still there, now 12 and more interested in horses than healing, spending every spare moment with her father, learning the business, learning the art of understanding animals. I think she is going to take over the ranch when I am gone, Vincent told Delilah one night. Good, Delilah said. She has your gift with horses and your stubbornness. She has your courage, Vincent countered, and your heart. 2 years later, they received word that Thomas had met a young woman in Philadelphia, another medical student, brilliant and kind. Her name was Sarah, and from the way Thomas wrote about her in his letters, it was clear he was head over heels in love. He is going to marry her, Delilah said, reading the latest letter. Is that all right with you? Vincent asked, watching her face. Of course it is. I want him to feel what we feel, want him to have what we have. She looked up at her husband with shining eyes. I want him to find someone worth moving mountains for. Thomas did marry Sarah, in a small ceremony in Philadelphia with his parents and sister in attendance. Sarah was lovely and sharp and passionate about medicine, and within 5 minutes of meeting her, Delilah knew she was perfect for her son. The young couple planned to finish their schooling, then return to Oro Grande to work at the clinic, just as Thomas had promised. Rose, at 14, was growing into a remarkable young woman. She had her mother's beauty and her father's quiet strength, and she could gentle a fractious horse or deliver a breech calf with equal competence. She talked about expanding the ranch, about breeding horses that could handle the harsh desert climate even better, about building something that would last for generations. You raised good children, Vincent told Delilah one night. We raised them together, she corrected. Everything good in my life, I share with you. The years continued their steady march. Thomas and Sarah returned to Oro Grande with medical degrees and dreams of their own, taking over more and more of the clinic's operations as Delilah gradually stepped back. She was 50 now, still sharp and capable, but ready to pass the torch to the next generation. Rose married a quiet rancher named James when she was 20, a man who loved horses almost as much as she did. Together they expanded the Nash Ranch, breeding horses that became legendary throughout the territory. New Mexico had become a state now, part of a growing nation, and the wild days of Vincent's youth were fading into memory. But some things never changed. Vincent and Delilah's love for each other, tested by time and hardship and joy, remained as strong as ever. They were grandparents now, with Thomas and Sarah giving them 2 grandchildren and Rose and James adding 3 more. The house was often full of noise and chaos and laughter, exactly the way they had always dreamed. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Delilah back to the canyon one more time. They were older now, moving slower, but they made the ride together just as they had done so many times before. 30 years, Delilah said, standing at the base of the cliff where the rockslide had happened. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Vincent said. It is both. I have been thinking about that night a lot lately, she admitted. About how random it all was. The gunshot, the rockslide, you being close enough to hear. If any one of those things had been different, if the timing had been off by even a few minutes, we would never have met. But they were not different, Vincent said firmly, taking her hands in his. These hands that had torn themselves bloody digging through stone for her, that had built them a home, that had held their children, and now held their grandchildren with the same gentleness. The timing was perfect. You were trapped and I came for you, and we fell in love and we built this beautiful life. That is what happened. That is our story. Our story, she repeated, smiling through tears. I love our story. I love you, he said. 30 years married and a lifetime left to go, God willing. They were given 15 more good years together. Years of watching their grandchildren grow, of seeing the ranch and the clinic flourish under the next generation's care, of quiet evenings on their porch and slow rides through the mountains they both loved. Years of love and laughter and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Vincent passed first, in his sleep at 70 years old, his hand in Delilah's, his last words a whispered, I love you. She held him and wept and thanked him for every moment they had shared, for choosing to turn his horse east that long ago night, for digging through stone to reach her, for loving her with a constancy that had never wavered. Delilah lived 3 more years without him, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, still working at the clinic when she felt strong enough, still riding out to the canyon sometimes to remember. She was 68 when she died, peacefully, in the house Vincent had built for them, with Thomas holding one hand and Rose holding the other. They buried her next to Vincent in the cemetery on the hill above Oro Grande, under a cottonwood tree with a view of the mountains. The headstone was simple. Delilah Nash, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, healer. And next to it, equally simple, Vincent Nash, beloved husband, father, grandfather, the man who moved mountains. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, and afterward Rose told the story one more time, the story everyone in the family knew by heart. About the Rockslide and the rescue, about a cowboy who dug through tons of stone with his bare hands to save a woman he had never met, about the love that had grown from that desperate night into something that had lasted a lifetime and beyond. They would want us to remember, Rose said, standing between her brother and her own children, looking out at the mountains where it had all begun. That love is worth fighting for. That sometimes you have to dig through mountains to find what matters. And that when you find it, when you find that person who makes you complete, you hold on and you never let go. The family returned to the ranch and the clinic, to the life that Vincent and Delilah had built together and passed down to them. And on quiet evenings, when the wind sang through the canyon passes and the stars came out over New Mexico, it was easy to imagine 2 spirits riding together through the mountains they had loved, Vincent and Delilah, together still and always. Their love as enduring as the stone he had moved to reach her, as lasting as the legacy they had left behind.